But it's funny on the speaking. I speak all over North America on ADHD, dyslexia. I'm one of the leading speakers on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And as you were just saying, you were in Alberta recently speaking on ADHD. And about a month ago, I spoke to the Alberta government. And there was about 500 people of that, looking at how to facilitate and support learning differences in the workplace. And, I have to give them credit. They're very much realizing the contributions that the neurodivergent brain has. If it nurtured properly and it gets through to success, creative skills, out of the box thinking, the ability to solve complex problems, risk taking, all the things that you need to be an entrepreneur that you used is present in the neurodivergent dyslexic ADHD brain. It's just a matter of supporting children as they grow up.
Hello, I'm John Brink and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world saying, Canada, we know where Canada is, and then British Columbia on the west coast, right. And then there is a big city in British Columbia. It's called Vancouver. Yes, it is. We are 500 miles or 800 kilometers for our European friends north of Vancouver, and that puts us in the center of British Columbia, north to south, east to west. A big province, and it's in particular in northern BC. It is nature's paradise. We have lots of forest. Prince George, about 80 to 85,000 people, and a beautiful city with lots of forest around us, with probably within 50 miles 100 lakes, and lots of other friends in nature, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, and you name it, we have it all here. And today we have a special guest. His name is David Chalk, and he is interesting because he learned to read at the age of 62 as a featured voice in a documentary, The Truth About Reading. He understands firsthand and life-altering impact of literacy. Despite reading at below grade 6 level, for most of his life he has navigated dyslexia and ADHD, I can't even say that word, a rare condition that impairs facial recognition and numerous other cognitive challenges. Interesting, David, because as you already likely know or may not, is I'm also ADHD and have dyslexia, and,
Aware.
I believe that you became a millionaire at the age of 20 or 23. And so I'm not quite there because I came to Canada when I was 24 and I only had $25.47. So anyway, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
So tell us about your experience. As I already indicated, it took me a long time that we have a connection. If I read the first line of your bio, learn to read at the age of 62, is that at the age of 62, actually I got diagnosed for ADHD. But I've always had challenges with dyslexia as well. I failed grade 3 in Holland, and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said and that was in Holland, they said to my parents, who were beautiful people and cared about me a lot and always believed in me, is that people suggested send him to the school of mentally challenged persons. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And so what we will do, though, is my grandfather was a master carpenter in Holland. My dad worked in lumber. And so they said, let's send them to a furniture factory that my dad had a friend at a furniture factory, and he will become a laborer. And so, and maybe a furniture maker. And so that's what he did. At the age of 12 and a half years old, I became a laborer in a furniture factory. Now, the interesting part about it was that after I failed grade 7 for the third time, the kids can be hard on each other. And all the friends that I used to have that went up to college and university, I became a laborer. So school, the last time that I failed grade 7 came out at May, June, and they had holidays, which was big then, for about 3-4 weeks. Here they have 3 months holiday, but in any event, there in Holland we had 3 or 4 weeks. But for me, I came out on Friday, I failed again, so my dad took me that Sunday to a friend who had a furniture or a clothing store, and I needed 3 sets of coveralls, and I was very small for my age. So we went down there, they didn't have so small ones. So I had to roll up my coveralls, and the crotch was hanging by my knees, which is more than today, but it wasn't then. And I became a laborer. But the friends that I used to have, all of a sudden, that always would go together on their bikes. And it took about 8 kilometers each way together, and everybody kind of folded into the row. For me, I was no longer part of that. I was now a laborer. And but still, I always was positive, and I always believed that I didn't know I was different, but I never quite understand why. And so it took a long time, but I had to make things hard for me. Now, the other part is that you may know I'm 84 years young today. I was born in 1940, and during the war years saw far too much that we should not have seen, and obviously as a result still are affected by PTSD from the war years and a child. And then I felt I had to. We were liberated by the Canadian Army, actually April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward I wanted to go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I first was going to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me then. Then when I was 18, I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for a little more than 2 years. And then after that, worked in lumber for a bit. And then finally, when I was 24, I wanted to start with nothing, start from the beginning all over again, go to Canada. And I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, couldn't speak language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada, 3 days, 4 nights. Oh my God, that's a long way. And then arrived in Vancouver and went to the immigration department close to where the train stopped, and couldn't speak English, but fortunately there was a German fellow and I could speak some German. I told him that I wanted to be, my second dream was to build a lumber mill. And he said, go to Prince George, June of 1965. And so I went with my suitcase onto the Greyhound bus. 60 years ago now, I'm still in Prince George. I can still see where the Greyhound station is. And I came off the bus with my suitcase, the 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. No job, couldn't speak English, and didn't know a soul. But what I did have is attitude. I'm always positive, no matter how tough things are. Passion. No matter what I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic. I work harder, even still today, than anybody. around me. And so I get up at 5:30 in the mornings, even now, always make my bed and always think I'm late. And so that's what I do now. And yes, I did build the lumber mill and did a lot of other things. And but then to get to the point that I was making, the similarities between yourself and myself, dyslexia and ADHD, it was not until something happened to me and I went into a bookstore here. I had been here already for 32 years, was quite successful in all the things that I did, but still did not have confidence and still thought, why am I different? And so I went into a bookstore here, picked up a book. I don't know why. I have still the book here. I picked it up January of 1997. The title of the book is Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Hollywell.
Write that one down.
Yes, and so Driven to Distraction, driven by Dr. Hollywell. Dr. Hollywell, very well known. He's a medical doctor. He's a professor. He is also has written 18 books, 5 on distraction, and is ADHD and has dyslexia. And so I picked up the book, and when I stood in the store going through this, and I said, oh my God, this is me, ADHD. And I wrote in the book, here it is, January 1997, this book, and I wrote in it in Dutch because I was ashamed of it because it was implied that it was a mental disorder. Now I finally know who I am. And so this is the book. And so then it still took me another 5 years before I started reading the book. I then went through Google, checking out ADHD, what it is all about, blah, blah, blah. And then I came to the conclusion in my mind, it is a superpower. And so I then went to my doc in 1962, or when I was 62 years old. I went to my doc, that was a personal friend, also had delivered our 2 daughters. And he said to me, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And we checked it out, and yes, I do. So there for 50 years, between the time that I was 12 and a half years old, became a laborer and was looked at as mentally challenged, dumb, and all the other kind of things that they looked at. But I always believed that I was just as smart, not better than the other ones, but I didn't know why until then. And from that point forward, it changed my life. And I became an author, written 6 books, 5 books. The 5th one is coming out in June, and then working on the 6th one. This one here, Against All Odds, I wrote 6 years ago when I was already in my 70s. And a lot of people had said to me, hey, John, you have such an interesting life. You should write a book about it. And as you know, writing books is not easy, especially not for somebody with ADHD and has dyslexia and doesn't speak normally. English is a second language for me, actually a third one. I grew up speaking dialect in Holland. Then I had to learn to speak High Dutch, and then had to learn to speak English and understand it. Then I felt I had to write a book about ADHD. I did that too. ADHD Unlocked, very popular book, actually. And I wrote a couple of other ones, and the last one that is out, the next one is in June, and about communication. This one I wrote is that Living Young, Dying Old.
Creative title.
Here. Yeah, picture of me here. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America, and I wrote a book about that and health and fitness. So it gives you a bit of a background on me in terms of discovering for from the time that I left school at 12 and a half, it took me till I was 62 for 50 years. I really didn't know who I was. And it was not until then that everything changed. And I already was successful in business, and from there and then it has grown, and we're still very, very active even today. So that's kind of my background, and you can see the similarities between you and me in that respect.
Yeah. Well, that really resonated with me. And I think there are far more similarities than you would even imagine. All the way back to landing in Montreal, coming across Canada on the train, and immigrating in Vancouver. I was 4.5, 5 years old with my parents. And like you, no idea that I was dyslexic, ADHD, and all the others. And from that point, my life in Canada ensued. And it wasn't until I was 42 that I understood that the reason they put me in a mentally disabled school, like what was going to happen to you, that my mom got me out of, um, I struggled. But from a very young age, not very young age, but I guess when I was 18 years old and got out of school, I, with my mom, made a choice to make something of my life, even though I hardly made it through school. I was bullied, I was tormented, I was the laughing stock of the class. And ironically, you said you failed grade three. I did not fail grade three, but grade three is a watershed year. That is when the education system looks at a child. From grade 1 to 3, you learn to read, and from 4 to 12, you read to learn. And if a child isn't reading at grade level, by grade 3, they hold them back. I don't know how I got through. I wasn't reading at grade level. But for the rest of my education, it was very difficult because without strong reading skills, it makes it hard. But the challenge for a dyslexic or ADHD child is far more than people think. The fact that we can't read well is only part of it. The attempt to read, we read with the wrong part of the brain. We absorb it in what's called the prefrontal cortex. And that is the part of the brain that's used for rational thinking, logic, and it sort of hijacks it. So for a child trying to read and be in school, everything is jammed into that prefrontal cortex. We overload, we get stressed, frustrated, and then we shut down.
I love it. So now the other part about it, and I love the comparison, David, that you made, and so the other part about it that I want to share with you that I believe is not just important for you and me, but also for all the people watching us from around the world, is that you are my podcast number 388, where I'm hosting. And then I've done about 200 or 250 where I'm guesting on somebody else's. The reason that it's not for the purpose of bragging about, but rather to share with the rest of the world the power of podcasting and the new media, as I call it, is very, very important. So your podcast number on the Brink 388. The other one interesting about it is that, again, coming back to Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell in 1993. I bought the book in 1997 here in Prince George, and as I wrote there, and then on my podcast number 203, I did a podcast with Dr. Halliwell. And I urge people that are affected by or benefit from it, in my opinion, in some way, ADHD in particular, but also dyslexia, is that to watch that podcast. And as I podcasted Dr. Halliwell, he's the expert, Dr. Professor, well known around the world, written 18 books, 5 on dyslexia, very, very well recognized around the world, is that I suggested to him, he's the expert, but I lived it and obviously got to know more and more about it as I became aware of it. And, so that in my mind, that I believed initially that probably 8% of the population ADHD in some form or fashion, and and equal between male and female, although females will present it differently than males. But I changed my mind about it. The more I found out about it, that I thought that'd be much more than that. And as I had my discussion with Dr. Halliwell on podcast number 2 and then 3, I suggested that, at least in my mind, probably up to 20% of the individuals around the world are affected by ADHD, dyslexia, or some form of neurodiversity in some form of fashion. And so I suggested to Dr. Halliwell that at least 20% of it would be ADHD. And he said, no, John, probably more than 25%. And I agree with them. At the same time, I've been benefiting from, since I have started numerous of business, we got, again, not for the purposes of bragging about it, but in order to put it into perspective, I have 10 different companies, quite successful, written 5 books. The 5th one is coming out, working on my 6th one. And so that part is important. And so in that process, I got to know a lot of entrepreneurs, been on a number of boards of directors, and I've met many, many different, successful business people, in particular, in all that time that I've been around. And I came to the conclusion, in my mind, I suggested to Dr. Halliwell, that in my mind, 50% of the successful, and the key is successful entrepreneurs, business people, have ADHD. He said, no, John, more than 75%. And I agree with him. So that changed the perspective in my mind. But for me, the point that I was going to make is that it was not until I was 62, and that for 50 years, I wondered, who am I? And I was still successful in business, but I did not, until I understood that I was ADHD and what it meant, and I had dyslexia, that I knew the one part that is critically important, it's also a superpower, that once you understand it and you can make it work for you, you can excel that other people likely wouldn't. So, and the interesting part, looking back, even in grade 3 and grade 7, I was always a good writer and I was good at numbers, but I was not a good reader. Neither am I still today. I'm, and obviously, I have an amazing memory. Obviously, I'm a successful podcaster, top 1% globally, and I'm a good presenter, as you are. I do. I'm quite an in-demand presenter, but I seldom use notes because I'm not a good reader. But I have an excellent memory, and I can give presentations for an hour, hour and a half. I did one, actually, you can relate to this. I did a presentation last Monday in Calgary to the Alberta ADHD Association. There must have been 350 or 400 people in that presentation, and so it was amazing. And I still do those kind of presentations in other places. The problem is presenting for me, I'm not trying to be important. For me is that if I do a presentation, it usually takes me 2 days from going there, presenting, and then coming back, and then believing I want to share with as many people as I can, not only what it means to me and my experiences in terms of ADHD, dyslexia, and all the things around creating confidence and self-confidence, that the podcasting has been much more important. I reach, like, can you imagine, there we are sitting here, you're in Vancouver, British Columbia, which I had no idea that you would be. Neither did you have an idea that I'm only a stone throw away from you. I have an apartment in Yaletown, and we have a place in North Saanich, so I'm around BC all the time. But, that all of that, considering that if we are on podcasting and sitting here, it feels like you're sitting in the room with me. And when I first started about 6-7 years ago, with blogging initially, then doing local discussions on the local television, and then COVID came, and then we said, what do we do now? I had an apartment, a penthouse apartment here in downtown Prince George that I bought as an investment, and said, well, let's turn it into a studio. And that's what we are doing now. And now looking back the last 3-4 years, we are podcasting here, and again, not for bragging about, the success of my podcast, is that our podcast right now, we are approaching, we are at 760,000 subscribers on YouTube, going towards 1 million. And that means the other platforms that this podcast, I know, will be watched by at least 2 to 2.5 million people globally. That's the power of podcasting. And that's why it is so important for me to speak about the issue. I do podcasting on all kinds of different fields, but I always throw in a piece about ADHD and dyslexia.
Yeah, it's funny in listening to all you're saying, you could be mirroring my life. ADHD, yes, it can be considered a superpower, and so can dyslexia. But the challenges for most people as a child is the torment and the shame and the humiliation, that they lose their self-confidence and don't go forward. I had a very strong mother who supported me through it. And I would say, that's 95% of the reason I broke through. But like you, I've started many companies. I haven't written a book yet. I had my own television show for many years. But it's funny on the speaking. I speak all over North America on ADHD, dyslexia. I'm one of the leading speakers on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And as you were just saying, you were in Alberta recently speaking on ADHD. And about a month ago, I spoke to the Alberta government. And there was about 500 people of that, looking at how to facilitate and support learning differences in the workplace. And, I have to give them credit. They're very much realizing the contributions that the neurodivergent brain has. If it nurtured properly and it gets through to success, creative skills, out-of-the-box thinking, the ability to solve complex problems, risk-taking, all the things that you need to be an entrepreneur that you used is present in the neurodivergent dyslexic ADHD brain. It's just a matter of supporting children as they grow up.
And I feel I have an obligation to do that. But it took me a long time, as it did for you as well, and then from that point forward, it then becomes a question of how do we reach as many people as we can. Now, so the other part that I'm going to do is I'm going to send you copies of my books, all 4 of them. I'm going to sign them, send them to you. And I do another book, the 5th one, that's coming out in June, that you may find interesting as well. So, but all of this started about 6 years ago. When I said, if I don't, they had said to me many times, hey, John, you had such an interesting life. Why don't you write your book and blah, blah, blah. Did all those kind of things about it. And writing books is not easy, and especially not for people like us. And so I started probably on and off and on and off. And I knew 6 years ago, if I don't do it now, it will never happen. And then once I did the first one, against all odds, then the more I became aware of ADHD and how many people are affected by it adversely simply by not understanding, especially young people, and that I felt that the more vocal I can be about it, the better. And so that's why it is so important to me. And then the other part I was going to mention is that after my interview with Dr. Halliwell and reading the book and becoming more and more aware of it, I believe that probably globally that the frequency of occurrence of ADHD, dyslexia, neurodiversity is likely as high as close to 30% of the population. And I believe that gradually, only very slowly, even still now, it's still not fully recognized by probably it is recognized, but not incorporated in the way it should be in education. And so the book that you may find interesting that I did, this one here, ADHD Unlocked, at one point, we have a place in North Saanich. So the weekends, I spend my week during the week here in Prince George or in Vancouver. We have offices, and then the weekend I just get a break and doing other things I spend in North Saanich. And so I was on my flight, my overseas flight, I call it 12 minutes from Vancouver to North Saanich or to Victoria. And so I was sitting next to this person, and the person said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me. Is my name?" I said, "I do somehow." And he said, "My name is Tom Romer." I said, "Oh my goodness, yeah." Tom Romer then, just before I wrote this book, was the vice president at Academia British Columbia Institute of Technology, and he's now retired. And so. And he said, "You wrote a book about," I said, I finished that, Against All Odds. But I said, I'm writing another one, and it's nearly done, ADHD Unlocked. And he said, "That's is interesting that you say about ADHD. And be doing some things about changing education and incorporating micro certification, which basically means that the education may be here, but the core of the education, that the trade that they want to convey to somebody is probably only here. So if you have a training that may be 2 years, 3 years, that probably only 6 months in total are directly relating to the skill sets that you require." And I thought that was interesting. Then we were in Victoria. Then the next week, I was sitting in 4A or so, and he was sitting in 1A, and the flight was full. And I had to, because I said there's still one part that's missing in the book. The book is done. It's a good book. But what is missing on it, in my opinion, is where do we go from here? And so he gave me that, and so I called him all the way in for M1A with all those people sitting, "Hey, Tom, wait at the gate for me." And everybody said, "Hey, what is going on?" So anyway, he waited for me, and then he wrote a piece in my book about micro-certification. And I thought that is a step forward in terms of recognizing micro-certification, and ADHD and dyslexia potentially, and how do we change our system so it recognizes that and addresses that. But I will send you copies of all these books that deal with it. But to me, it has become very, very important to share with the rest of the world and with the people that directly potentially are affected by it. And that's why your involvement in my podcast are important, because you're so similar in an amazing number of areas that I didn't even recognize initially.
Yeah. Well, I like you in the sense that when you go through this, at the time it can be very challenging, but you realize after that the ultimate thing you can do is help the lives of other people. that suffer. And you said I learned to read at 62. And there was an interesting story behind that, because that was about the time that COVID hit, and my colon ruptured. You don't normally survive from that. You go sepsis immediately, and somehow I got through to 911, and they got me to a hospital that was closed for COVID. But there was a doctor there that looked after me and kept me alive. After coming through that, I realized maybe there was something more I could do. The fact that when we say I can't read, yes, I could hop my way through sentences. By the time I got to the end of the sentence, I couldn't really remember what the prior paragraph was about. So I reached out to someone, and he put me in touch with a very famous gentleman in California called John Cochran. He wrote the book, The Teacher Who Couldn't Read. He is ADHD and dyslexia, but he went through school, became a university professor, and finally went public that he was hiding a deep secret. So a few years back, in that year, when I was 62, he told me he was developing a documentary. They'd been looking for 2 years for an adult who would come forward and admit that he could not learn to read to help others. And again, it was in the middle of COVID, but I flew down to Michigan, where I was put in a 5-day, 1 hour a day program. And this is what is so shocking about it, of an advanced way to learn to read that is more like pattern recognition, not looking at the word as a word, but there's only 26 symbols in the English language, the letters of the alphabet, and there's only 44 sounds that combine to make up every word. And he had said, if you're willing to go on camera and be filmed from beginning to end, and if you succeed in reading, we want to use that as the documentary, The Truth About Reading. I had no idea that it would work. I knew I couldn't read. But by hour 4, when I was under the intense training with the lights and the cameras and the Hollywood production crew and the director and everyone there, which added one more layer to, but I found it very exciting. I was tested after the 11th hour, when it was finished, at reading at a post-university level. And it absolutely changed my entire view of life and the world, because I knew what I had gone through. I have a background in artificial intelligence and technology, and I realized what had happened to me. I had a wonderful one-on-one instructor who knew her material very well. It's called the science of reading, and it's a different methodology for learning. But I also realized how engaged I was. So for the last couple of years, I've been working on a plan. I've still got to raise the financing for it, but I'm complete, to use artificial intelligence, a very special version of it. It's called narrowly trained, to go one-on-one communications like the way you and I are talking right now. And we can do that already. We can even interrupt. But the AI is also trained on human emotion and cognition. So it recognizes eye dilation, facial movement, and voice tonality. So as it is providing you the science of reading methodology, it is monitoring real time your absolute emotional level and keeping it within what's called a 4% range. That magical little range is called the zone of proximal development. Some people might know it as flow. You get it all the time, I'm sure. When you're doing something you're passionate about and it just absorbs in, and you fall into a world where time doesn't matter. Some relate it to playing a video game, but that is flow. So developing AI that can put a person into flow and then teach them to read, my goal, and this is my give back, is developing it and providing it to the world for free. There's nearly 800 million people in the world that suffer from dyslexia, ADHD, and other neurocognitive challenges, struggle to read, and their lives are sad. There's incredible amount of mental illness. The jails are full of people that did not want to be crime-ridden, but they had no alternative. Graduating from school at a grade 3 level of reading. So once I have developed it, it'll be called Reading Road, and we will make it available to anyone who wants to learn to read. But it is revolutionary because it'll work outside the education system. It'll allow a 4-year-old child to learn to read at a grade 3 level before they enter school. And that means the change in everything, because the reason most people are in jail, the reason most people suffer, The reason most people like you and I never succeed that are learning diverse is not because they're dumb or stupid. It's because they're shamed so badly in the early years. They lose their self esteem, they lose their motivation, and they lose their belief that they can ever be anything. So if we can teach children to read and go into school comfortable, they'll participate, they'll engage, they'll be creative, they will enjoy the classroom environment and accelerate. And as they go through those early grades, their learning will be exceptional. They'll graduate into a world of AI and technology that needs them. And as you said, the brain of a neurodivergent person actually contains the superpower of what is needed to be successful in a digital age. And combining that with artificial intelligence and having them graduate from school, we are going to see a change in the world that will have a massive economic impact. So that's my give back. That I suffered and I learned, as they say, suffering brings about opportunity. But mine is there's millions of people. There's 160 million people in North America alone that are suffering from ADHD, dyslexia, and reading at a subliterate level. So I'm very excited about what's going on, and I just think about all those people and all the children that are in school and are going to go in school that won't have to suffer what you did, the pressure, because that grade 3 failure would be devastating. The grade 7 multiple times would be devastating again. It does not have to be that way.
And I agree with you 100%, David, and you can relate to this. When I was in grade 7, and in particular in Holland, the grading system from a 1 to a 10, is usually how things were graded, and most people were between a 7 and a 9, and that is 6 or a 9, and I still remember now, but so every time the teacher would read out the numbers, and then the last one they would say, and John Brink, as usual, a 0. And so I became the laughing stock a lot of times, and what was called all the stuff that you so well familiar with. But I was lucky and fortunate that underneath I had my own world, and I knew within me that I was just as smart as the others. I didn't know why or why not, but I knew that, and I had confidence in it. And I believed that when we got liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945, that it made such an impression on me by the Canadians that I would go to my dream was to go to the land of my heroes. And then when I went through all the other things, the other one was to prove to me that I was just as smart as all the other ones. And my grandfather, as I said earlier, was a master carpenter. My dad worked in lumber. And for me, I was in lumber. I wanted to build my own lumber mill, starting with nothing. And so, and although there were some of the companies that I worked at had contacts here, I didn't want any. I wanted to start with nothing from the ground up. And either a little bit radical, go back in the box or successful, one of the two. And so, but so it took me, as it did for you, a long time to say, who am I? And once I discovered that, it then allowed me to go forward and go beyond that, and becoming successful in business, although I was already, but even more so. But it's not about money, it's not about business, but in particular about the ADHD, and then I was different, and to make that, and realizing it's a superpower, to make that grow and do other things, sharing with others in particular, write the books about it, do the podcasting, amazing vehicle, really, and and that changed everything, and that's where I am today. Now, the other thing I was going to, this is eerie how similar we are, you and me. And so this book here living young, dying old, is that, and this is a picture of me today, and then I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America, but saying, how did this all happen is, well, I was just like everybody else, like my wife is, very much conscientious of diet, and she's a vegetarian. I didn't listen to her as well as I could or should have, although I was not necessarily bad, but not quite as well. Until in 2008, when I was already 58 years old, something triggered to made me even more aware. I got a case of, and this will connect to your story here, I got a case of diverticulitis. It ruptured my colon, and so I was in
That's
the.
what ruptured mine with diverticulitis.
So
And you know where it comes from? It's from the cortisol that for someone who suffers like we do with this, there's so much cortisol from fight or flight that it begins to eat through your stomach, make those pockets, which they call diverticulitis, and it ruptured.
So I was in Victoria at the time, and I have a high threshold for pain, which is not good. I laid in bed on Sunday, but then I have a companies here in Prince George, and I had immense pain. You can relate to that. I made it back. I said, I have to get back. It should have put me down. They would have put me right in the hospital there. But I had to get back the following morning at 5 o'clock. I took the flight Victoria to Vancouver. I went from gate A to gate C, which I'm a go-go guy. It took me nearly 25 minutes to go from gate 8 to gate C, hanging on to the side because I want to go on my knees. As soon as I did, they would call the ambulance. And I had to get back to Prince George. I got back here to my doc. He said, get to the hospital. I got here, and that same evening, they made me ready for the operation. They took out 20 centimeters out of my colon. And the following morning, the doc came in, and he said to me, you came this close to being too late.
Mm-hmm.
And,
You know, I honestly, at times, I can't believe how parallel they are because for me, they took 16 inches of my colon out and said that, we don't know how you made it through, but you did. I was going to also say that starting the same way, you wanted to build a lumber company. And for me, I wanted to build computers. It was in the very beginning of computers, and I started in my mom's basement, learned everything about them by myself, and created one of the larger computer companies in Canada. But not because I knew how. And for me, it wasn't because I knew I was smarter. I actually thought I was damaged. But it just so happened that I could have these very creative thoughts. So for me, it was a challenge all the way through. But as you said, with persistence, I don't give up. It's one of the qualities of dyslexia and ADHD. And I would encourage anyone who's suffering to believe in their dreams, even if they don't believe they can do it. 98% of success is showing up.
correct. And to believe you can. And
Mm-hmm.
so attitude, passion, work ethic, what will follow is success. Now, just coming
Yeah.
back to this other one with the diverticulitis. So that then I realized I survived this. And so then, I started to look more careful at my diet, listening to my wife more carefully. And then at the same time, before that, I had been the same as everybody else. You go to the at the end of the year, you're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and then you're going to buy a membership to the gym, and then 2 weeks later, you can find 100 reasons why you're too busy to go to the gym. And so I did that, and then I hired a trainer. I became more conscientious about diet. I hired a trainer, and after I had the trainer for about 6 months, or 6 years, somebody came up to me and said, have you ever thought about competing? I said, me? Really? Yeah. and I started competing. I became bodybuilding. First Northern British Columbia, second bodybuilding, third in physique. I was already in my 70s. Then we had a bodybuilding contest in Vancouver for the British Columbia. Came again second and third bodybuilding and physique. That qualified me for the nationals in the Arnolds. And then COVID came. Now again, motivates me to go to the gym. I'm again training for the Arnolds. But the other part, even more important, living young, dying old, is saying that is health and fitness that I appreciate even more so after coming this close. Now, we're nearly running out of time here because you have to do another one here. And so we're going to have to do more. I'm going to have to meet you in person because we got so much in common. I'm going to start with sending you the books right away, and then we can then stay in touch. So give me the information, not right at this moment, but is there anything you want to leave on the podcast that is a contact for you that you use to contact your clients, potential clients, that you want to?
Yeah, I have a rule that anyone who ever reaches out to me, I follow up and I try to guide them and help them. There's a number of ways you could find me. You can find me on Wikipedia. You can find me. I don't have a YouTube show, but I am there. That I've done a lot of interviews. My email address, and you can maybe put it in the notes of your podcast, David, is my name, David at chalkcorp.com, CORP. And I'm honest with, I spend a lot of time supporting people who really know they can do something, but don't believe they can do it. If people do want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to give them guidance and insight at no charge.
Excellent, David. So let's make sure, I'm going to send you the books. We'll stay in touch, make sure I have your information. I'll probably will give you a call as well. And so after this conversation, and for all the people watching us from around the world, an amazing, I cannot believe, I had no idea that David was so close to where I live. And we are so close in terms of our life experiences that it is uncanny in a way, but again, it shows you the absolute unbelievable things that happen in podcasting. Subscribe to my podcast and David's podcast if he's doing some, and then share it with others and comment on it and like it, because it will encourage me and others to do podcasting from around the world. And so, David, amazing podcast. We'll stay close from here on forward. We've developed this friendship now in terms of having so many similarities. We have to stay in touch.
Thank you. I will.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Bye now and goodbye to your audience.